Hi, I'm Christian St. Marseille with Sweet Honey and Honey Records. I'm here at Cobb Baptist University with Professor Dan St. Marseille and Professor Kevin Richardson. They're featured on our upcoming EP, and I'd just like to ask them a few questions. So, first, I'd like to ask, what made you guys get into music? What made you attached to being a musician?
I think for me it was a very natural step because I came from a musical family. My father was an opera singer, my great uncle was an accomplished clarinetist, and so I got interested in music at a young age. And like many of us, started in grade school. I started on clarinet, and I think I knew by the time I was 10 I wanted to be a professional musician. So I was studying clarinet. I had an interest of maybe playing in a symphony, but I discovered Benny Goodman because I was a clarinet player and uh, found a love of jazz music, and so I pursued that and eventually took up saxophone and clarinet and flute and pursued a career right out after high school and got an education in music. So that was kind of my start. A very familiar story, I'm sure.
Awesome.
I think I got into live music by watching live music and going to performances long before I even touched any instrument. And it just grew on me, the excitement, the energy that I would feel from people performing and the applause. And one thing led to another. I wanted to play drums, and there was no more drum sets at the school. And they said, "Would you play trumpet?" I said, "Sure, I'll play trumpet." And so I played trumpet. And I'd played bugle in the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, and went from there. And then I would go over to the theme parks, Disneyland and Knott's, and hear all these live performers, every style of music, country, bluegrass, jazz,
Wow.
classical, and hear these performances. And I was just enamored. And one day I just got the courage to ask one of the performers on a break if I could take lessons.
Wow.
And one thing led to another, and it just kind of lined me up on a path by watching live music.
That's awesome. So, being a musician, you often have to have some sort of mentor or teachers along the way. Have any of you guys have any prolific teachers throughout your career?
I was very fortunate because my father was a professional musician that when I was 14 and knew that I needed to have lessons. I needed to have a mentor that could teach me how to play the clarinet properly, the pedagogy of the instrument. And so he was able to connect me with a wonderful clarinetist who was the founder of the woodwind department in 1928 at Oberlin Conservatory. His name was
wow.
George Wallen. And I studied with him through high school, and then I had very good teachers in college. But I would also say the second person that really was a huge impact on my life is the wonderful Gary Foster. I met him in 1980, just coming out of high school, and was able to study with him for 6 years. And throughout my career and my life, we've maintained a very close and warm friendship. And I think that actually speaks to what a real mentor is.
Yeah,
It's
for
always
sure.
somebody that you think of often and you're playing and you just think about the contribution they made to your life. So I would say George Wallen and Gary Foster, and there's countless others. There's orchestra conductors, other people I studied with, but I would just like to sort of highlight or point to them. They really blessed me and put me on the right path, and they had just the right amount of rigorous training with encouragement.
Yeah, it's always awesome to have a mentor that you could rely on and still keep a connection after your lessons.
Yes.
It's awesome.
One of my mentors would probably be Bobby Shue, trumpet player. Lead player would be a Louis Bellson Big Band, and
Wow.
that's where I first met him at Carnation Plaza at Disneyland, of course. And I ended up studying with him in college, and we got to know each other real well. And he just helped me kind of navigate the path of music. And he had recommended me for one of my first great gigs, so I was really happy that I could, get work. And it was all about. He kind of taught me that it was all about who you knew and getting to know everyone you can. Ask a lot of questions, and that's basically for me. And again, many others in all different styles of music that I would get little hints from band directors on up to professional musicians.
That's awesome. Next thing I would like to ask you guys is, how did you guys get into working professionally as a musician, and how that was for you from the beginning?
Well, I think my story is just like anyone else. When you're a musician, it's very hard for anyone to talk you out of wanting to be a musician. So just after high school, I just started getting some small gigs. Actually, my first gig, I was 16 and got a job. Buddy Ebsen's wife, Buddy Ebsen, the stage and television vaudevillian actor, who's probably best known for the Beverly Hillbillies. His wife had a company in Newport Beach called the Newport Harbor Actors Theater. When I was 16, they needed a clarinetist, and because as a last-minute sub, and they were very reluctant to hire me. But I came in, and actually, the music director thought enough of me that they didn't ask the other clarinetist back. So that kind of launched my career. But I think if you're in music, you're eventually going to just make connections and start to network, and there's going to be gigs that come your way because you're working towards excellence and trying to become a good musician. So, I mean, there's other things that I can point to, but that was sort of a flashpoint for me. I mean, I never considered that I would not be a working musician. Even when I was a young kid training, I always dreamed about it, and I just did it. I went out and networked and found ways to be involved in music throughout my life.
Speaking on working professionally, can you give me maybe one key highlight moment of working with someone or recording with someone, the show?
I've worked with many people, and I think probably my recording studio collaborations are some of my favorite times, because I got to record with my teacher Gary Foster, Poncho Sanchez, Claudio Roditi, Bill Cunliffe, a long list of some of the best musicians. And the intimacy of being in a recording studio where you have to really focus and come together and yield and make sure what you're doing is fitting in. Those are some really great moments. I've worked with some named people, but I think just the recording environment's been really terrific for me. I would say one highlight would be 1999, when I got to play at the Coleman Hawkins Festival in Topeka, Kansas. And in front of the house were the Coleman Hawkins houses in Topeka, because he grew up in Topeka. He had relatives that raised him there. Having the honor of playing Body and Soul,
Wow.
that Coleman Hawkins made so famous with his recording, right in front of the house, was really kind of a very sentimental and meaningful highlight for me, for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about you, Professor Richardson? How did you get into working professionally?
Well, it's kind of like a snowball effect. I was just so excited about music. I would go to everything I could and jam and go to anything I could find. And at first thing I did was playing at this bar in Anaheim. It was with Eddie Davis and Ed Slauson on drums, Gary Hogan on bass. And I was probably in 9th or 10th grade, and my first time to play in a jazz ensemble with real professionals. And a friend of mine from high school, he played tenor sax, Harold Manning, and we had this opportunity to sit in and play a couple songs like A-Train and Satin Doll, and it was really a moment that, wow, we can actually play with these guys. It's actually possible to do this. I mean, we weren't at that level, but they were kind enough and gentle enough to let us play with them. And we weren't perfect by any means, but that welcoming atmosphere gave me such encouragement at the time that just one thing led to another, and it just kept propelling me further and further to the next opportunity. I mean, I practiced and I practiced, but I learned that I had to create opportunities, because if I just sat in my room and practiced, where would I be heard? So I realized that you have to get out there and
Definitely networking.
Get involved, playing everywhere you can, and that was for me. It just one thing led to another.
That's awesome. Professor St. Marseille, I'd like to ask a question towards you. As a musician, you have to often have a lot of different skill sets in music, such as composing, teaching. Tell me a little bit about the record label that you started in the mid-1990s, Resurgent Music.
Yes. So I had produced a master tape with Gary Foster and a wonderful trumpet player named Larry Gillespie, and a pianist, Cecilia Coleman, and Denny Dennis, the drummer, and the bass player, Eric Stiller. It was a tribute to Chet Baker. And I was friends with a jazz photographer, William Claxton, very renowned, one of the co-founders of Riverside Records. And Clax, as we called him, had sort of introduced me to a few people with the idea of maybe trying to get a record deal. I mean, I was sitting talking to Columbia Records and all these different, and the mantra, or what I was hearing was, wow, great album, you sound great, but you don't have an album out. I mean, the old catch-22, right?
Yeah.
We want to put your album out, but you don't have an album out. So I think one of the music directors, or A&R guys for the record company, said, why don't you try and put your album out and see what happens? So I just did a pressing. I think I pressed like 1,000 of them. I had them in the trunk of my car. We were delivering them to radio stations. It was getting radio play. And I mean, I was selling them to my dry cleaner, whoever else I did business. And I recouped all the money. And I found that I sort of had an enjoyment of creating music, producing it, marketing it, and that. So shortly thereafter, I made friends with a gentleman named John Breckler, who was the founder of Seabreeze Records. And he had an account with Bayside Distribution, which was Tower Records' distribution company. And he came to me, he said, I've heard good things about what you're doing. I'm close to retirement. I would like to hand over my distribution company to you. And you will just pay me like a small royalty on whatever you sell. And so next thing you know, I've got my record in every Tower store in the world, and then I started producing or co-producing or having relationships with friends.
Yeah.
That I remember we put out Andy Martin, the trombonist. His debut CD was on Resurgent Music, and rather than take these large checks that I was coming, I mean, obviously there's royalties and stuff going out. I decided to do what they call sweat equity. I wasn't trying to pay myself for it, so we invested all the money back into advertisement and got, like in Times Square at the Tower Records, end rack placement of Resurgent Music records, and it was quite successful. And of course, the industry has changed, and so it's not really a viable thing anymore. But I'm very happy about the work we put into that. And so, to your thing about being kind of holistic, you have to have carry a lot of hats when you're a musician.
Yeah.
You know, you have to teach, you have to play, and in this case, I really enjoyed the business end of being in the record industry.
It's really awesome. So, Professor Richardson, I'd like to ask a little bit. I know you played in Buddy Rich's last big band. I'd like to hear a little bit about your experience working with him and the other musicians and how that was being his last group.
Yeah, that was a great experience for me. Life-changing, just an amazing opportunity. Again, ability and opportunity to meet. There was no audition, just I got recommended by a couple teachers and friends, and just there's no rehearsals, just the first gig. You're there, and I was still learning the book, and you have to pull these numbers up. Buddy starts playing on the hi-hat, and it's like a code for the number, and they say, okay, it's number 34, Best Coast.
A lot of tricks,
And it was just great. And the first gig, I remember I was, really nervous, but prepared, but just nervous. It's a new gig. You don't know how it's going to go. And I'm getting on the bus, and Buddy's sitting in his seat with a towel on his neck, and
he's always very.
He goes, "How'd it go, kid?" I go, "Oh, it went great." And he says, "Good." It's like, wow, what a rush that was, and all the lifelong friends I made, and all the people before and after me. Well, before, no, there was no more after, but I've kept in touch with a lot of those people, and
That's awesome.
And we all followed our paths in the music industry, and it's been wonderful. It's just it was just a real blessing for me to get that opportunity. It just propelled me to the next place I needed to go. So
that's awesome.
Very thankful for that. And Buddy, was a great guy to work for. He had his personality on stage, but off stage he was a very kind and generous person. And I'll always remember that.
So last question I want to ask you guys is, what advice would you give to the up and coming artist and musician today?
That's a very important question. I think oftentimes when we're young, we don't realize that it's a lifetime of music to create achievement. And if I could just be so bold as to say, we live in a culture now where everything's pretty much instant gratification. You hear that all the time, right? We're on our phones. To be a musician and to be an artist is something that you're very passionate about. And if you have that passion, you need to work at a sustained effort.
Yeah.
Not too much, not too little. And the last thing I would say is you have to have sort of the short game, but you have to ask yourself, where do you want to be in 5 years? Let's say you're 18 or 19 years old. When you're 25, what do you see yourself doing, and what are you willing to do that's morally good to get yourself to the point to be able to do what your goal is?
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's rigorous work, the pedagogy, that's the fancy word they use, of how to play an instrument, how to do things, can be very tedious, and you have to have the tenacity and the rigorous discipline to do it if you want to play. Like if you're going to play saxophone or trumpet, you just don't pick those things up and play it. And
Yeah.
I think you need to be a good, well-rounded, holistic musician that can read music, that can improvise. I would highly recommend, if you want to be in the commercial area, that you become a jazz musician, because that will offer you the most flexibility to pivot or do whatever you want, harmonically, rhythmically, stylistically, and it'll make you easier to be employed. And it wouldn't hurt to have some classical chops too, like if you're doing a show. But there's a lot more. We could talk
Yeah.
for hours about that, but that's kind of in a nutshell sort of my philosophy. And be a good person. When
Definitely.
you show up, it's very easy. We live in the moment sometimes. You don't realize the long lasting effect of going to a performance or something and you make a bad impression because you're being selfish or you're being self-serving or you have a sort of an elitist attitude.
Yeah.
Just be cool and
Yeah, I agree.
and know that the person you're sitting next to, even in college, 30 years from now, you may be collaborating, they may be hiring you. And the people that have money to pay you, they've achieved their status and the ability to pay you because they're excellent. So you have to be excellent also.
Yeah.
And that's something you have to think about every day.
I totally agree. Professor Richardson, do you have any words to add?
Work as hard as you can at this time in your life when you're young. Between 18 and 25 is where you really put a lot of time in to form yourself and make the connections that can last you a lifetime, and really love what you do, or the aspect of playing and performing and learning or teaching. Just really have to love it and have it as a passion. You'll put it at the top of your list before anything else.
Yeah.
And it's time well spent because you're laying a groundwork, a framework for your future, and then maintaining those connections with people that you've known, lifelong friends like Dan and I. You just always maintain these friendships, and it takes work to maintain these friendships. They just don't happen. It just takes like tending a garden. You've got to water the garden, you've got to plant it. It's all this thing. It's an ongoing process, but
Nurture, yeah.
it bears fruit, and you
Yeah.
just got to always think of all the ways you can make it work, and also treating each other with love and respect, and navigating the difficult times as well as the good times. It all works out if you just keep adjusting slowly as you go.
It's awesome.
Wonderful.
Well, thanks again for stopping by and doing this interview. Everyone watching, keep an eye out for the upcoming Sweet Honey EP release featuring these two gentlemen, and hope to see you guys soon. Thank you.